Good evening, everyone. I will read the legal notice for tonight's public hearing. It's the Town of Clinton, notice of public hearing for the American Recovery Plan Act, ARPA funding. Notice is hereby given that the Town Council of the Town of Clinton, Connecticut will hold a public hearing on Wednesday, January 12th, 2022 at the William Stanton Andrews Memorial Town Hall, 54 East Main Street, Clinton, Connecticut, for the purpose of the following. The public hearing will consider and receive comments on a proposed spending plan for the American Recovery Plan Act recovery funds. All interested parties may attend and be heard. Dated at Clinton, Connecticut, the 21st day of December 2021, Chris Anaskovich, Town Council Chairman, and this was published in the Harbor News, December 30th, 2021. So before we start, council members, obviously we're here to listen, so the public will have their opportunity to speak. Our job, obviously, at tonight's meeting is to listen to the comments, take notes for the public. After this meeting tonight, we will then reconvene again to discuss any other comments, questions, or concerns that come from this meeting, and then we will vet the findings from that meeting. And then at that point, we will go to a town meeting where the town will have the opportunity to vote on where these funds get appointed. So that is sort of the process that we'll be working through over the next couple of weeks and most likely into next month. Carl will give an overview on what we, as council members, have already seen so that the public can see it. There is a form that was distributed on our website. If people do not have those, we do have a couple up here if people need those. And then the only other thing is the correspondence that everybody in the council received, that we did receive 3 letters from John Allen, the EDC, Lynn Heidick, and Nikki Dacus, and so we all have copies of that, so we do have those. So at this point, we'll have Carl give his presentation on the plan, and then after that, then I will bring the public up and you'll have the opportunity to speak.
Okay, just walk everyone through what ARPA is, or ARPA, so that we all have the same basis of understanding. So ARPA came out of the Biden administration as part of the COVID pandemic recovery program intent. The desire was to lay the foundation for a strong, equitable economic recovery, so it's typical federal stimulus type programs. Unlike other federal programs, this is a direct allocation to each municipality. That does not happen in normal people's lifetimes, so it's very much a unique program that's being directly allocated to municipality. We aren't applying for it. We are receiving a specific amount of dollars based on population. Unique to Connecticut is that because there is no county level government, the dollars that would have gone at the county level have been redistributed down to municipalities. So municipalities in Connecticut are getting a little bit more than our peer municipalities in other states because they have a county layer where the state got money, the county got money, and then the town got money. Here, Clinton is getting its piece of Middlesex County's money plus a specific allocation to the town. So total for the term of the program would have the town receiving a little over $3.8 million to appropriate for COVID recovery. The goal in the program is not to just spend the dollars, but to be thoughtful, be strategic, look for long-term benefits to the town, have an impact, look at things like what can we leverage with these dollars in order to have more bang for our federal buck. So what's an eligible expense? There's a pile on my desk about this tall, which is just the interim rules. Final rules dropped last week, so I'm working my way through War and Peace here in order to review what the revised final rules are for what is eligible, what the additional standards are going to be for distribution of dollars to the town, and then any recipients that would receive dollars from the town. Despite the interim rules and the final rules, there is sort of a general rule, which is mirrored in both documents, which really gets to if you're trying to create a program that's to respond to the pandemic, you really have to look at whether or not those dollars will overcome an issue or problem that was created or exacerbated by COVID. It's not just simply a matter of spending dollars on nice-to-haves. There has to be a tie back that goes to the pandemic. So it's really a matter of looking at what the harmful effect was, what did COVID do to the community that either made a bad situation worse or created a bad situation that didn't exist before the pandemic hit. Look at what the connection is and then figure out how we're going to prove how the expense is going to deliver an outcome that responds to the negative impact of COVID. So some of the buckets that the program can have dollars spent on. The final rule starts the process of shifting around some of the categories of where the dollars could go, but for the purposes of consistency, these are the buckets that were used in the interim final rule. So first was to support public health expenditures. Again, it's determined whether and how the expense that you're planning on spending the dollars on would respond to the COVID public health emergency. The types of activities specifically called out are programs or services meant to contain and mitigate the spread of COVID. So that would have been retrofits in order to put up screens to protect people from potential exposures. It would have been testing. It would have been vaccination clinics. In Connecticut, some of those programs were addressed previously under the CARES Act, which came out of the Trump administration, or through FEMA, which remains an ongoing emergency, where FEMA is still reimbursing some of those expenses. And then it can also be used for payroll and benefits, which would have been really more of a health district expense at this point, but the health district is getting its own support dollars from the state. Another category was addressing the negative economic impacts caused by the pandemic. This responds more to individuals needing assistance, families that may have had a disruption due to a job loss or other economic compression. Could be areas to support small businesses as they struggle through cash flow difficulties or having to close, having to open, having to close again based on whatever the rhythm is of the responsibilities that we have to do to respond to the pandemic. And then the Act specifically calls out assisting the tourism sector, travel and hospitality. Other categories: replace lost public sector revenue. This was a popular option used by some of the bigger municipalities in Connecticut to backfill their budgets. They were simply taking some of their ARPA money, using it to balance their budget, and then spending it on capital programs or other projects that weren't necessarily related to COVID. Under the interim final rule, which existed before last week, that did not work for Clinton. The calculation that we're supposed to specifically follow does not deliver a lost income calculation to the town. Because we sold the old Morgan, we closed on it during the year that the Act says we have to look at. As a result, we don't really get the opportunity to say that we lost revenue. There's a second formula that's created in the now final rule for a different approach to try and be more flexible in response to municipalities that were having issues with the calculation. It can also be used to provide premium pay for essential workers. That's employees, individuals collecting a paycheck. It does not respond to volunteers. And then investments in water, sewer, broadband infrastructure. That's it. If you're talking about general infrastructure beyond those three specific things, that's not ARPA. That was the infrastructure bill, which started being debated after ARPA got approved, and is an entirely different funding stream. So when it says water, it's drinking water, it's sanitary or sewer water, and then stormwater. Broadband infrastructure is filling out where there may be problems with high-speed internet, inability to get access to broadband. The final rule expands broadband to also include specifically Wi-Fi. It was implied in the interim final rule, but now it's specifically stated in the new bill, or the new rules. Prohibited uses cannot be used to directly or indirectly offset a reduction in net tax revenue, so you can't use it to pay for a tax reduction. You can't use it to put into a reserve or rainy day fund. You can't use it to make payments to a pension fund. And you can't use it as local match for any federal grant. So if you're looking at a federal grant, you have to come up with dollars outside of ARPA. It's not clear as to whether or not this would be responsive to a state grant, where the state's money is sourced from the feds. But right now, we don't have any feedback from how the state wants to use its dollars, where we could leverage one of their programs. So just a general advice, again, back to that general rule, a general infrastructure project would not be included unless the project responded to a specific pandemic, public health need, or specific negative impact. So again, your expenses need to tie back to COVID in some fashion. Treasury, the Federal Department of Treasury is supervising the program. They are the ones who are responsible for the rules. So we need to make good decisions at the local level to allocate the funding. There needs to be good governance on those dollars. The new final rule speaks volumes about process and ethics and making sure that dollars are distributed appropriately. If you're aware of reporting in the media, West Haven was kind enough to sort of set the benchmark for Connecticut by inappropriate use of their dollars, which has ongoing audits right now, but it sets the tone that you've got to make good decisions on how these dollars get allocated. We need to ensure that activities are truly eligible expenses, not what we think, but what the rules help tell us what they are. Because if something is determined after we've spent the money, which is when Treasury is going to look, that it's ineligible, the town has to repay the federal treasury whatever those dollars were. Directions follow the final rule, and then again, remember the general rule, any ideas, concepts, or expenditures have to come back to having a nexus with the pandemic. Deadlines, the time to incur costs or obligate, or for our purposes, appropriate those dollars is the end of 2024. Reporting on those dollars carries out till end of 2026. And every dime needs to be spent by the end of 2026. If we have not spent everything by the end of that year, those dollars have to go back to the Treasury. This is what the interim expenditure categories were. The final rule shifts some categories around, duplicates categories, but again, for the purposes of convenience and the council's recollection, this is how dollars under the interim rules were supposed to be reported to the feds. It gives you some insight into what might be an eligible expense versus an ineligible expense. So sort of that public health category was vaccination, testing, contact tracing, which I guess is falling out of vogue. Dealing with congregate settings, that would be nursing homes, things of that nature. Personal protective equipment, medical expenses, capital investments or physical plant changes to public facilities. That was already paid for earlier in the pandemic from FEMA, where putting up plexiglass was the popular thing to do. Other COVID public expenses, communication, enforcement, and quarantine, payroll for public health, mental health services, substance use services, and other. Negative economic impacts, so this would be household assistance in a number of flavors, providing food assistance for those that are food insecure, providing financial assistance for those that are having issues with rent or are behind on their rent. It could be used for mortgage payments for those that have fallen behind and are delinquent in their mortgage payments. Utility arrearage would also be another area where you could provide assistance. Direct cash transfers are allowed, however, there's new rules attached to that, as well as income eligibility. Internet access for those that have issues with connecting to broadband or fiber or whatever is available in the community. Eviction prevention assistance, that if that's not addressed in providing rent assistance, that's really providing legal aid to people that are going through the eviction process. Unemployment assistance, job training assistance, contributions to unemployment insurance, that's not our piece. Small business economic assistance, aid to nonprofits, aid to tourism, aid to other impacted industries. There was no specific language on what that meant under the interim rule. The final rule starts to describe a little bit more what other impacted industries are, and we have to benchmark what that industry is based on the hit that tourism and travel took. So you have to it has to be a business that's suffered as bad as a tourism-based business. Other economic support, and then rehiring public sector staff, because a lot of cities laid off employees during the pandemic because they experienced budget crunches. That's thankfully not an issue we had to deal with here in Clinton. The interim rule had a category called disproportionately impacted communities. That category has been blown up and was redistributed across other categories where they're looking at disproportionately impacted communities versus just impacted communities. Disproportionately impacted communities are usually a group either by virtue of where they live in a qualified census tract, which Clinton does not have any, but that's a federal term used for areas of poverty. It could also be race-based and not just income-based. Premium pay, you can provide a payment up to a certain dollar amount now to individual employees that were perhaps involved in pandemic response. Infrastructure, so you've got a series of clean water, drinking water type eligible expenses for wastewater, combined sewer overflow, stormwater, energy conservation. Drinking water is for treatment and distribution, so this gets to it dealing with issues of like lead remediation or access to clean drinking water, and then broadband. Revenue replacement, already discussed that. That's not really immediately eligible for Clinton. And then administrative expenses, which is the cost to administer the program, can be paid by program dollars. So the proposed allocation plan, as we have it now, does not commit all 3.8 million. And the conversations with the council were that we not appropriate all 3.8 million and allow for an initial tranche of funding to be approved, and then as other projects, which are in the process of being refined, get quantified and reviewed, we would go through this process again to continue spending the ARPA dollars. But out of the gate, under other public health expenses, was looking at communications and information technology. So that's communications aimed at our ability to reach out to the public, again, in terms of pandemic, but beyond the pandemic, to be able to reach out to the public and provide them information that disconnects us from the state's communications network. The state limits what we can say, they limit how long we can say it, they can limit our messages, and that becomes an issue with how well we can communicate with the public during a time of emergency. Having our own system frees us up from that restriction of what the state puts on us. IT is aimed at expanding online permitting so that the public does not necessarily have to come into town hall to get permits and the like, that can be done from the comfort of their home. The COVID angle is keeping the public out of congregating points like town hall, but the long-term public benefit is services can be delivered like the 21st century instead of the 1950s. And then other IT expenses were focused on providing other means to support the ability to do remote meetings, hybrid meetings, with a camera setup that can live beyond the pandemic and provide a useful life outside of where we are today by allowing us the ability to record more meetings, make those available to the public so that it's not just the town council that's being televised like this evening, but other larger boards and commissions where there may be strong public interest could also be televised. Mental health services, this was aimed at responding to a need that we're seeing in the Human Services Department, where there is more need for counseling to support individuals' mental health coming through the pandemic. There's pressures on folks. People are finding other ways to respond to that. Mental health needs in some communities is also coupled with opioid abuse or other substance abuse issues. So we're trying to make sure we have a program that can respond to that need in the community. Housing assistance, again, through Human Services, we're generally looking at providing the means to help certain folks with their ability to meet their rental payments, their mortgage payments, their utility payments. We were creating a separate senior assistance program, which was going to provide similar level of support but specific to just the senior population who may be experiencing different pressures or concerns in their ability to get out and about. Internet access, there are some people who have issues with getting access to technology, be it the actual device itself or an internet connection. That hampers their ability to get back into the workforce, that hampers their ability to live the way everything has now migrated to an electronic platform. So we're trying to provide some funding that would meet that need. Small business assistance is a number of potential programs. So we're looking at expanding facade improvement dollars, providing funding for small business rent rebates, which would help the tenant business or a startup business as they're trying to address cash flow. Vacant storefront activation is sort of a similar theme of trying to fill in any gaps that there may be in the downtown fabric where you've got an empty business. Economic recovery consultant, trying to engage an individual that would help businesses position themselves for what they needed to do to recover generally. Business support grants was just sort of a general category. That could take a number of potential flavors. The final rules speak to identifying a class of business, and then a program gets built around that class of business. So an example would be restaurants were put under unique pressure during COVID for being open, not being able to have people inside, having to do takeout and shift. Some businesses pivoted well, others struggled to get there, but ultimately got there, but they stayed open during the pandemic. That would be a class we could respond to, and then within that class, we could give them grants equal to their CRAD health permits or something of that nature to reimburse an expense that was made more difficult. Aid to nonprofit organizations. A number of nonprofits have come forward. A lot of this is groups looking for funding to respond to one or both being revenue loss, where they cannot get the funding resources that they need or haven't had the ability to conduct fundraisers like they did in pre-pandemic, and therefore that causes a problem financially to the organization. And then if they're tight financially, you've got some that are filling the void significantly for what the public need is, and therefore they're getting the double whammy of less income coming in, but increased demand for services and increased expenses. Families Helping Families would be a good example of an organization that's doing a heck of a lot more now today than they did pre-pandemic, and that would be an entity that we would be looking to provide some additional funding to. Aid to tourism, this is aimed at providing marketing of the town so that people are aware that Clinton is open, it's the tourism destination, the use of the community in the summer is here, it's safe. Asset signage is, in this particular case, is looking at providing signage for historic districts as tourism assets. The final rule raises a number of concerns about using ARPA dollars to sign or provide dollars to a for-profit tourism business, so there's a lot more to unpack once we step outside of what the sort of the general, I guess what you call a public sector type tourism asset. Other economic support is focused on issues associated with childcare, where individuals may have unique childcare issues that aren't being addressed in the broader network of daycare, and that's holding somebody back from job search or their ability to get back into the economy. And then outdoor spaces, one individual is looking for ARPA support in order to build an outdoor space to allow for activities to take place in the open air rather than inside buildings, which was the big pivot in COVID. Additional funding, in this case for affordable housing, was housing pre-development costs. The Clinton Housing Authority is interested in doing a project on their property. They need pre-development dollars to get themselves rolling and position themselves for future state funding rounds. So this is trying to get them through the initial hurdle, and then the capital dollars and build-out would come after they've done some of their pre-development work and have leveraged some of the state's funding programs. Clean water, stormwater is focused on so-called green infrastructure as it relates to stormwater. There's a number of opportunities and a desire from groups to disconnect large areas where you've got impervious surface draining directly into the waterways that go out to Long Island Sound. The state has this as an interest. Yukon was in earlier, assisting the town identifying potential projects for how we could create rain gardens and things of that nature that would intervene and stop this direct runoff of sheeting water off of a parking lot directly into a water course, and everything that's in that parking lot finding its way into Long Island Sound and creating issues in Clinton Harbor, issues with the shellfish, and then general quality of water in Long Island Sound. So this is 3 projects that would step up and deal with a couple of sites on publicly owned property that would allow us to sort of make that disconnection. Broadband, other projects, so this was outdoor public Wi-Fi, of expanding Wi-Fi opportunities at a number of municipal sites that currently don't have access to Wi-Fi. That would allow both parks and some of our coastal areas to have public Wi-Fi as people move to go outside to do work. A number of people have had meetings at the beach pavilions in order to be in an outdoor venue. So the Wi-Fi provides the opportunity as a long-term public amenity, but then also is responsive to COVID. General administrative expense, this is an estimate based on where we could go with having an entity assist us with making sure that we're accounting for these dollars properly, and then doing the regular reporting that has to be done to Treasury on what our expenses are. So the first slug of cash was already received at the start of the fiscal year, so July of 2021, so 1.9 million came in. We're anticipating tranche 2 to come in, again, as another 1.9 million, about that same time of June, July of 2022, bringing us to the 3.8 total. The proposed allocations total 2.14 million in dollars. That is where we stand today, so that delta between the two gives the council the ability to consider additional projects. So there's at least 3 projects have come forward to my attention that have yet to be reviewed and vetted with the council, so those would be other things to discuss, and we have flexibility to consider other projects in the future. So the local process, which is part of what tonight is, it's unusual to receive direct funds from the federal government. We don't have a rhythm or a system in place that responds to this type of delivery of dollars. The charter doesn't really respond to it, so we're trying to find the best vehicle in order to figure out how these dollars should be legally appropriated so that they can be spent. So ARPA is very much a grant, but the advice out of an abundance of caution is that you treat it as a budget type item where you have to appropriate it. It should be accounted for separately and not baked into the town's budget and sort of exist outside of that stream, but we should be mirroring the budget process to a certain extent to appropriate the dollars just to provide that degree of comfort and transparency. So the process, we've done the first step, which is the council has reviewed the initial projects. ARPA has been discussed by the council in a series of workshops now, both with the old council and now the new council. The public hearing is tonight to get some feedback on spending categories or potential projects that would need to be vetted. The next step is the council would then have to meet and discuss, review, vet, make decisions in terms of where they want to move things forward. By charter, the council would be then making a decision to refer those expenses for appropriation to a special town meeting. The special town meeting is the entity that would ultimately approve the appropriations. One wrinkle is that any special appropriation over $300,000 needs a referendum to approve. So that being said, if we have a series of appropriations that are under 300,000, town attorney is comfortable that the town meeting has the authority to approve that. If we have an individual project that exceeds that $300,000 threshold, it's off to a referendum for the public to vote on. So the part of the pricing of the plan has been specific to avoid the added expense and process of doing a referendum to approve individual projects. Part of the prior vetting of some larger projects that would have been over 300,000 was a concern over our ability to actually spend the dollars by the end of 2026, because we would be reliant on state agencies to provide permitting and their process review. The dollars are also short of what is needed to do some of those larger water or wastewater projects. And as a result, not only you'd have your ARPA dollars, but then you're back out as a referendum to approve local bonding. So the preference was to focus on these projects, which are executable and can move and get the dollars deployed into the local economy. So after tonight, we'll have to review that. I need to finish reading War and Peace here so that the final rules are at least understood at my level, and then I can review that with the council, and then we can move forward with the subsequent steps.
That's it? That's all you got?
That's all I got.
I'm sure everybody's got all their answers, all their questions answered at this point, so. As you can see, it's a moving target for not only Carl, who has done a wonderful job with this. He's been the lead on this from the beginning, and we are blessed that we have a town manager in town that can handle this. This is a project that, obviously, as you can see, takes on a lot of work and a lot of his time, and ultimately, will fall, and we're going to lean on Carl as a council to get a lot of direction from him. As you can see, these are specific funds that are going to be allocated, and we have to make sure that we do it properly so that they don't come back to us and say, we need the money back. So I'm sure people will have questions going forward, so the dialogue just needs to stay open between everybody in town and Carl and the council so that we can all work together on this, because I'm sure, as you can tell by tonight, a lot of people have a lot of interest in this, and it's something that is going to be a hot topic going forward. So thank you, Carl, for all your work in getting this done for tonight. At this point, we will open it up to the public. Anybody who would like to talk, we do need you to come up here and speak at the microphone, state your name and state your address for the record. And then basically one by one, just come up when you feel you'd like to talk or have something to say. So we will open it up to the public at this point. So anybody who's interested in speaking, please come forward. We only have one. We're going to be out of here.
Hey, everyone.
Hey, Eric.
Good evening, Mr. Manager, Chairman Askovich, Madam Clerk, and Town Councilors. Under the current proposed allocation of the American Recovery Fund Act, just under 3% of the $2.3 million is being directed to infrastructure, and under 2% allocated for clean water, specifically stormwater. According to the Connecticut Conference of Municipalities ARP Advisory Committee Municipal Toolkit, local towns are permitted, I believe, and I'd like to think encouraged, to invest in water and sewer, specifically projects eligible under the two following categories. One, the Clean Water State Revolving Fund, which would include the creation of green infrastructure and the management and treatment of stormwater. And two, climate change and resilience as it specifically pertains to water. While small business economic assistance is essential and vital to our community's health, it is, as it clearly is, a priority at over $1 million allocated. We cannot and should not overlook the public health concerns as it, again, specifically pertains to water. So I kindly ask you to allocate some of these funds, perhaps at least 10%, in support of infrastructure projects that will surely protect the environmental health and welfare of our residents. Thank you.
Thanks, Eric. You use address? His address? Good, okay.
Good evening, Carl and Town Council. I'm Pat Lindahl. I live at 110 East Main Street, Clinton, Connecticut. and I am currently the treasurer of the Stanton House. I'm going to read to you a letter that we sent to Carl on December 2nd. Dear Mr. Kildruff, it is my understanding that the town of Clinton has received funding through the American Resource Plan Act, ARPA, and is able to support local nonprofit organizations who have been affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. The Stanton House, Inc. is a valuable cultural and historic asset to downtown Clinton. The Stanton House and General Store was built in 1791 by a wealthy, striving merchant businessman whose entrepreneurial spirit and extraordinary taste can be seen in every aspect of this unique house museum. Filled with clothing, furnishings, documents, and store inventory, all belonging to the original Stanton family, the house provides a glimpse into 18th and 19th century life in a privileged New England family home. In 1916, the house was left in trust by Stanton heirs to become a house museum and has been open to the public ever since. The pandemic has created a serious hardship for the Stanton House, as special events and fundraisers have been put on hold indefinitely. Except for membership renewals and a few donations, our general operating coffers are at the lowest point we have experienced since taking on this project. Our annual operating budget is $25,000. You may be aware of our ongoing Raise the Roof capital campaign, which the organization has been actively promoting during the pandemic. Happily, online donations and private grants have been secured, but all of those funds are carefully earmarked for the restoration of the roof and cannot be used for household expenses. We sincerely ask the town of Clinton, using the ARPA funding, grant the Stanton House, Inc., the amount of $30,000 to refill the coffers for the remainder of 2021 and provide necessary support through 2022. This was sent by Bob Bruce, President, who is most appreciative of your acceptance. And additionally, as we continue to pursue grant funding to complete the roofing restoration, which is another $29,000, we have just been informed, unfortunately, the entire east wall of the museum is extremely weak and needs replacement as soon as possible. It is an extremely expensive endeavor to try to preserve and maintain a museum. Please help if you can.
Thank you, Pat.
Peggy Adler, 5 Liberty Street, Chairman, Historic District Commission. Historic District Commission sent in a request to the town manager regarding these funds on October 3rd. It says, present-day Clinton has an amazing number of 17th, 18th, and 19th century buildings still standing, which are listed in the National Register of Historic Places. National Historic Preservation Act of 1966 is amended, established the National Registration of Historic Places, and it's administered by the United States Department of the Interior's National Park Service. Clinton currently has 2 National Registered districts, the first being the Clinton Village Historic District, authenticated in 1994. This district runs from Indian River to Route 145 and includes Cemetery Road, Church Street, East Main Street, Liberty Street, Waterside Lane, and Old Post Road, and has 144 contributing buildings, 2 contributing sites, 3 contributing structures, and 6 contributing objects. Yet nowhere is there signage stating that this is a National Register district. Thus, the Historic District Commission has decided to undertake this task, and we would like Clinton to be known for its rich history and not just the premium outlets. The key word is tourism. At the eastern end of Liberty Street and Route 1 is a 7-foot granite signpost that was installed when 3 Liberty Street became a bed and breakfast. But as of this summer, 3 Liberty is now under private ownership and is no longer a bed and breakfast, and the new owners have given permission for the request for a double-sided 3-foot by 2-foot sign to hang on their post designating Clinton Village Historic District. And it would be made by Clinton Signs of Art Times at the cost of $200. HDC would also like to see an additional 7-foot granite post installed at the west end of Clinton Village Historic District, which would require the purchase of a 7-foot granite post from Premier Stone of Killingworth for $325, in which to hang a sign made by Signs of Our Times, which would be identical to the one that the Historic District Commission wants at the eastern end corner of Liberty Street and Route 1. The sign would also cost $200. Installation of the sign post would be $150, and a 4-foot bracket from Signs of Our Times on which the sign would be hung would be $86. And so the total cost for all of this would be $961. The signs will be very similar to the brown signs you see on Route I-95 that are federal signs. They're brown with white lettering. And it would say Clinton Village Historic District, National Register of Historic Places, United States Department of the Interior, Department of Parks. Thank you.
Thank you, Peggy.
Good evening. Phil Sengel, James Vincent Drive. I want to thank the town manager and the town council, especially for allocating some of these funds, at least in the current proposal, towards nonprofit organizations. I think nonprofit organizations are the heart and soul of any community, and I think their energy, their vibrance shows the health and vibrance of the town in which they reside. These organizations provide hundreds, if not thousands, of hours of volunteer work every year for the benefit of Clinton, and I think they're very important to support, and I appreciate the fact that you've recognized this. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil. You missed us, I know, Mark.
Welcome. Many of you have heard my spiel before, but I'll give it to you one more time. Mark Richards, by the way. I'm proposing that part of the storefront that Carl spoke about earlier, that we bury the utility lines going to the center of town, a minimum of from CVS to the east, and the Pearson School, to the west, and the Pearson School to the east. Certainly like more, but I think that would be a good start. The town of Clinton and the EDC spent some dollars putting together a proposed renovation for the downtown area, done by Miss Diane Nazarko. Did a terrific job, looks great. Her renderings show no utility lines, and if you superimpose those utility lines upon her proposal, it really is dramatically detracts from what she's put before us. State of Connecticut and their agency, the PURA, has stressed over the years that we should bury all of our power lines underground, especially after all these storms that we've had in the past, ice storms, hurricanes, and undoubtedly we're going to have more in the future. Well, you know, although the state and PURA probably should somehow figure a financing of all this, which will include our electric rates, I don't think we can wait for them to do that for the town. I think this is a very worthy capital project that have a dramatic, long-lasting impact upon the town of Clinton. It's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, once-in-a-lifetime dollars, as Carl even spoke about. I doubt we'll ever get a funding of this magnitude in the future. And I think this is a great opportunity to do this, to spend money. Some people, you know, we complain about spending money on consultants and studies. Well, here's something very concrete. Something we can show the citizens, something tangible, something concrete that we'll have for years to come. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Anyone else? Come on up.
It's all right. Yeah, Alan Kravitz, 32 Merrill Road. I came in here with a list of things on my mind, but most of them are precluded by the restrictions on funding. What does seem clear to me is that very little money is really going to the needs of the people who are most economically affected. A lot of money is going into the category of economic development. It probably would be more effective from an economic development perspective to give the money to the people and let them spend it in town. I also noticed that there's nothing here that relates to the problem of children and education. And there's a lot was lost. There should be a program in here that deals with preschool and school-age kids and gets them back in the mood and gets them thinking about their educations. That's basically what I'm concerned about.
Thank you, Alan. Anyone else? Anyone else? All right, seeing none, then I guess we are good. Again, thank you, everybody who came tonight to come out and to obviously hear about what the town is proposing and what is going to happen going forward. Hopefully everybody has a better understanding of how this is going to work going forward. Obviously, feel free to ask questions, to talk about it, because I'm sure, once everybody leaves here, there'll be more questions. So obviously, as you know, it'll be an ongoing event. So again, thank you for coming, and let's all, again, we're going to try to work together with the community to make sure we're doing the best for the community. So thank you again. Look for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor? Thank you, everyone.